Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started. All right. So welcome to, I think, it's our third Clinician Educator Portfolio Workshop. This is sponsored the Office of Faculty Development, and thanks to Jennifer back there for keeping us organized and having some treats this afternoon. So just to briefly introduce, if you've not gone to the website, it's ofd.wsl.edu. And I'm Mario Castro. For those that haven't met, I co-chair or run this office with Angela Brown. And Angela will be here a little bit later this afternoon. So this is our brief agenda. We want to spend just a brief amount of time going through the promotion process. Dr. Vicki Frazier will cover that, and what's important in terms of the CV and the Clinician Educator portfolio, and what is the Department of Medicine looking for, but more importantly, what's important for the appointments and promotion process. And we're going to spend the majority of time breaking into small groups, and all of you should have a group number. If you haven't found your group number, please contact Jen. She'll give you the group number. And so we're going to break out into these small groups so you can get personalized feedback on your CEP. So our mission in the Office of Faculty Development is really to provide you all with guidance and resources that will foster your professional development and your personal development to achieve success academically as well as clinically in a supportive environment. If you haven't received an email, we do have a family day at the City Museum this Sunday. And if you haven't signed up, it's not too late. We'd be happy to have you and your family come. And it's at 11:30, I believe, is when we start. And your family is welcome to come. It's a fun time to see faculty on those slides and going around those caves and so. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Frazier. Family Fun Day. Yeah, it's for new families. It's for new faculty if you've been hired in the last 5 years. So we don't count. But you're more than welcome.
Probably come if you want.
You're more than welcome to come, though.
So Mario and Angela set up the new faculty family day actually as part of the new faculty orientation as a way really for people to get to know each other and facilitate networking, particularly for people who hadn't done their primary training here. And so for those of you that this fits for, the City Museum is incredibly fun, very family, kid-oriented. You should wear comfortable, safe shoes. I think wrist guards, hand pads, sometimes knee pads might be indicated. One year we had someone in a long dress climbing through a jungle gym and up a slide that was incredibly heroic in high heels. So that was a little worrisome for me. But we haven't had any injuries or accidents yet, so it's all about continuing that safety record. And this is Dr. Angela Brown, who's the other director of the Office of Faculty Development. If you want to say anything officially, we just started.
Oh, no. Welcome. Thank you. Any questions?
So I'm Vicki Frazier. Hopefully I know all of you, and I've met all of you at some point, probably multiple points in your careers. I want to take this time to really welcome you, and I'm thrilled that you guys are all participating in this program. Angela and Jennifer and Mario have done an extraordinary job really putting these workshops together to try to help support faculty development and help people keep track of their activities, their accomplishments, and it facilitates me actually getting you promoted. And quite frankly, I think the vast majority of people in the Department of Medicine work incredibly hard, are very productive, do lots of extraordinary things. And what I found in my first couple of years as a chairman when I was starting to put people through the promotions process was that I knew more about them just from knowing them as people than they had written down on their CV. And so in the discussions, I'd be talking about all of the extraordinary things they had done, but often it really wasn't on paper. And so it's very important, I think, for you guys to learn how to document your activities, and we're going to talk a little bit about why. So this is a joke, obviously, but I think sometimes we get in a position where we expect people to just think, well, the way you're going to get ahead is by working harder and faster and harder and faster. Excuse me. But that's not really the case. I know that you all are working incredibly hard. It's about documenting what you do and having really a portfolio that demonstrates what you are doing now, what you did in the past, and that you set it up in a way that makes it easy to carry forward into the future. So the things that you all should have, and that I didn't know to have until pretty late in my career actually, were an NIH Biosketch. And unfortunately, the NIH is torturing people by changing the format of this about every few years. So there is a recent change in the format of the NIH Biosketches, which if you do research at all, and this is not relevant if you're not doing any research, but if you're going to be a collaborator on a grant, if you're going to be a PI or a consultant on the grant, you really need to have an NIH Biosketch in the correct format. And so we'll put on workshops for that as well to make it easier for people. The CV is also critical, and every institution has different formats for how they do CVs, and so we want you to have yours in the WashU format, which really facilitates some recognition. When we do the ad hoc committees and there are people from multiple departments looking at your CV, they're looking for things in a standard fashion and format. So that's why we're going to try to help you with that today. And then what's really new for our department is the Clinician Educator portfolio. This has actually been done by the pediatrics department for a number of years, and it was established by them, and they were kind enough to share some of their expertise about the benefits of the CEP with us so that we could evolve it so that it worked for faculty in the Department of Medicine, is that a traditional CV in an academic institution does not always have mesh headings, thematic domains, or enough description of clinical and educational activities to allow an understanding of what people do with their time. So the Clinician Educator portfolio is required by our department now for all faculty who are on the Clinician Educator track. People on the investigator or tenure track and the research track don't have to do it. They certainly can if they want to have additional information presented. But for the clinician educators, it's really essential. And I review your CV and your CEP every year with your division heads and look at, what you've been doing for the past year. So the Clinician Educator portfolio has lots more room for detail about who you teach, what curriculum you've developed, how much time and effort goes into teaching, what kinds of clinical activities you do, what the patient populations are, how many hours, how many months on service, how many patients, what kinds of comorbidities you care for, and programmatic interventions that you've done to improve quality, safety, outcomes that are not typically captured on a CV very well. So just now having the Clinician Educator portfolios, when we put people up for promotion, we give their CV and their Clinician Educator portfolio to the internal review committee, to the ad hoc committee, to the executive faculty, and that written documentation makes a tremendous difference in people really understanding what you do every day and what your contributions are. For people doing research and who will be requesting funding as a consultant, collaborator, PI on grants, your other support is also essential. And that other support really documents your current federal and community-based research funding as well as pending grants. Now, I think for people on almost every track, having a trainee table is also very beneficial. Most of you, no matter what track you're on, will start mentoring people. You'll mentor high school students, undergrads, postgrads, fellows, junior faculty. And keeping track of who you mentor and their outcomes is really essential. And so there are multiple formats for trainee tables, and they can be relatively straightforward in terms of spreadsheets to start with. But the basic information you need are the name of the trainee, the years they worked with you, what level they were, high school, college, postdoc, fellow, when they worked with you, what their project was, and then the funding stream, if they had a funding stream. But then ultimately what's most important is that you keep in touch with them so that over time you can track their productivity in terms of their publications, what they went on to do later. And that makes a really important contribution to people being on training grants and doing mentoring and recognition of what you do for training and support of other people's development. And this can be focused on research, or it can be focused on clinical mentoring and clinical training as well. Now, the other things, and most of this goes either in your CV or your Clinician Educator portfolio, are things that are pertinent related to what you do with your time. So specific lectures, your teaching, your clinical time, your administrative service, and community activities. We have a number of faculty who do tons of charity work, who do teaching in the community, and that actually is quite valued. There are honors and awards here for those kinds of activities, and we'd like to put you up for those awards, but the only way we know, other than me running into you and seeing you out in the community doing it, or reading about it in the newspaper, is to have you put it in your CEP and in your CV. And then your research projects, your abstracts, your papers obviously need to be in there, and any honors and awards you receive. And ultimately, this documentation becomes your portfolio that you will use for a very long time and will continue to build the longer you're here. Now, this is also a joke, but I think you can't really succeed and progress well without expecting that you're going to have regular interactions with your section head, your division head, your chairman, so that your goals and their goals are aligned, and that you have regular communication about what you're doing, and if your time and effort are spent on the most important things. So obviously we don't want people to just criticize. We want people to really understand, mentor, nurture you, and I think that's very important within the department. So to be, I think, an effective mentee or faculty member, it is your responsibility to give people regular updates about what you're doing. I love it when people send me stuff that they got honors and awards, that they got a new grant, or they got this score, and I try to keep track of all that, but also to disseminate those successes. So don't feel like you're bragging, and don't feel like you have to, celebrate in isolation. We want to celebrate your successes, but that means you got to let people know. And it has to be on your CV, your CEP. You have to let your section head, your administrators know, and ultimately get it percolated up to the department. So when you meet with your mentor or with your division head, I think it's really good to have a structured agenda whereby you come with your career development plan, you have your goals on there, your objectives, and some monitor of the progress that you've made. So that if things aren't going well, or if you have a barrier, you can discuss what the barrier is and how to overcome it, but they can also see that you're progressing and that you're being successful. So sometimes people just show up for mentoring meetings and there's no agenda, there's no sort of plan of things they want to discuss. That really is not a good use of either person's time. So the more organized you are about having an agenda, having a list of things you want to discuss, and showing people, what you've been doing. Most of you are in divisions that are pretty big, and it is not likely that every division head knows everything you're doing every day. They know you're working really hard, but they may not know, every success, everything you've been working on, every idea you have. So the more you brief them, the more successful you will be and the better their understanding will be. So, and I think it's good for you to ask them, how am I doing? Are there things I should do differently, things I could do to be more effective? Are there things that I should do more or less of? Is there anything I'm doing that's inhibiting my growth and development? Now, that's a little scary for most people. And if I had to guess, how many of you have ever done that? Yeah, so not very many people. So it is hard, but the more you do it, the easier it'll get. And unless you do it, people are less likely to volunteer feedback that you need and coaching that you need. So when you open yourself up and ask for that kind of feedback, you make it a lot easier for people to give you just-in-time and real-time feedback. And then, you can act upon it. So I think that's something that people really need to think about doing. And at least once a year, you ought to be thinking about doing your own self-appraisal based on your goals, your objectives, your career development plan, and looking honestly at what you've been doing, how you've spent your time, did you achieve your goals, where are you? And just that exercise in and of itself will be incredibly useful. What I find usually when I have junior faculty do this is that they've set overly ambitious goals, which is sort of understandable. I'd rather have people set really high, big goals than, shoot too low. But often people are harder on themselves and grade themselves lower than actually the boss or any other objective person would be reviewing them. So what you want to do is use that as another tool to prompt feedback and evaluation so that then you can have a dialogue about how you could be even more effective in the future. And I think the other thing that I hear the most from faculty is not enough time in the day, feeling kind of overwhelmed. And so I think that often comes with a disconnect from people who like everything, are good at a lot of different things, and say yes to everything. And ultimately, you cannot do 100 different things. So at some point, you've got to have somebody else help you say, it's time to give up these 3 things. You should focus on these 4 things because these are most important for where you are in your career, and help you prioritize. So you can do that with your mentors and section heads and division heads. So let me just go over a little bit about how the promotions process works at WashU. We have an APGAR document, which is available, and everybody should read through it. There are 3 tracks, and each department has a little bit different process for how they do their promotions. So for medicine, our internal committee exists for review, and that's the division heads group. And then the division heads and I review every faculty member every year to go over their documentation, their career development plans if they submit those, and try to understand how we can best support people's career development and who's getting ready for promotion, when that should be, who's ready for career transitions, or who's struggling. And the things we look at ultimately to put forward for people's promotion packets are their CV, their clinician educator portfolios, letters of recommendation, and some manuscripts. And this varies a little bit by what track people are on, if they're on the research track or the investigator tenure track or the clinician educator track. But there are similarities for all 3 tracks. So when people get promoted at the level of assistant professor, we generally have 3 to 4 letters. Generally have about 6 letters for people getting promoted to associate professor, and sometimes 8 or 10 letters for people getting promoted to professor. Those letters are really very important, and they're a combination of letters from the inside and from the outside. And they need to be from the people who know you best and who are also the most distinguished, in the sense that we're looking for people who've evaluated a lot of faculty, and so Usually that's associate professor, full professor, people writing letters for faculty promotions. So, we generally have a timeline. We're looking at people all the time, and then we make recommendations based on putting people up for promotion based on, the progress they're making towards their career goals. So once we have the packet together, then I review all those with our division heads. They're all discussed in great detail by the division head, and then all the division heads vote about whether they're ready to go up for promotion or not. And once it goes through the internal committee, it goes to the ad hoc committee. And every department and all faculty go through an ad hoc committee. And the ad hoc committee includes 4 to 6 department chairs and 2 to 3 senior faculty members, not from the department that is putting people up for promotion. So the Department of Medicine has 5 or 6 ad hoc committee meetings every year, and we generally bring 2 giant binders with 30 to 50 faculty members that are being put up for promotion, and all of their packets. And I come and present every one of those faculty members to the committee. And all of the material has been sent out to them ahead of time, and there is no one else from the Department of Medicine on that committee. So the people I'm presenting you to are biochemists, cell biologists, surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, and there are basic scientists and clinical departments. And I can pick a little bit who's on that committee, but I can't cherry pick and only put people that I like, or that you like. I can't put people that you're collaborating with. I can't put people who are in conflict with you. And it's always a really mixed group, some of whom may have no clue what a transplant nephrologist does, or what a hepatologist does, or a hospitalist does. So your packet really has to help them understand what you do, why it's so important, and your value to the institution. Now, I can say this all, but I got to get through 50 people, and usually these meetings are a couple hours. Once I present and I take questions, then I have to leave, and they discuss everybody without me in the room. So what you submit is critically important, and people read every word. They will find every typo, they will find every grammatical error, and they will think it reflects poorly on you. So even though, I'm not the best speller, this is really important to make sure that it's perfect and that it looks as well as it can and that it truly reflects everything you do, because that's really what people are evaluating. And then after they vote, they call me after the fact. If everyone's approved, then the portfolios all go to the executive faculty, which are all the chairmen of all the departments here at the medical school. And then after that, the ones that are promotions with tenure, an associate professor, full professor, go to the Board of Trustees. So this is not a simple process. It's a lengthy process because it's sequential and not parallel. But this is fundamentally the principle that every department, every faculty member is reviewed under. So here's just a little bit of a timeline. For people on the tenure track, they have a time clock. And that's different than the other 2 tracks. So on the tenure clock, people have basically 7 3/4 years from the time they are appointed as an assistant professor on the tenure clock to when they must be put up for promotion to associate professor with tenure. Otherwise, they have to leave. So technically, people think it's 10 years, but it's not. I have to get everything through, and it has to be approved by the Board of Trustees by 7 3/4 years. Otherwise, people can switch tracks, and but if people are not promoted with tenure when they are on the tenure track, then they have to leave the institution. And they have a grace period in which they can still stay here until they leave, but you can't stay on the tenure track past 10 years, as an assistant professor unless tenure is granted. So it's a little unique here because tenure is granted at the time you're promoted to associate professor. On the clinician educator track, there is no tenure clock. So for many people, that's way less stressful, and there are different expectations for what people get promoted on. People get promoted on their clinical expertise, their teaching expertise, and their scholarship. And scholarship is broadly defined. It can include funded research. It can be a mix of time and effort for people. We have some people on the clinician educator track who are 100% clinical. We have people who do 50% clinical, 50% teaching. We have 30, 30, 30. There's all sorts of diversity on the clinician educator track, which is a wonderful thing. The tenure track is really set for people who are doing 80% research, basic translational or clinical research, but 80% of the time is dedicated to research. And what they are evaluated on is their research productivity. They're as recognized by independent funding and national, international recognition. The research track, the third track, is for people, we don't have any PhDs probably in the room, people who are either doing teaching or administration or research, but who have PhDs and who don't want to run their own independent lab and be independently funded. So this is like a nightmare of bureaucracy in some respects. And so for those of you that are good at Lean Six Sigma, this is a process begging for a Lean Six Sigma transformation. But this is basically the process that's required to get somebody initially appointed and to get somebody promoted through the process. So it does take months, but it all starts with you, with your CV and your clinician educator portfolio. I can't do anything, and your division head can't do anything until we get a great looking CV and CEP. And unfortunately, I have to send them back and forth, sometimes 2 or 3 times, which delays things considerably. So in a perfect world, the packet comes to my office perfect. And, you know, I have some obsessive compulsive people in the office who really look at things and who have sent it back sometimes multiple times before I've seen it. But the more you do to ensure that your assistants are aware of the formatting requirements and have really been meticulous about this, the better. So spelling errors, grammar errors, typos really reflect badly. And ultimately, it's your responsibility to fix everything because we won't. So the format for the CV is on the Faculty Affairs from the Dean's Office website, but some really good medicine examples are on the Office of Faculty Development website, and we keep putting new examples up there all the time. So the thing that I think is different from the Office of Faculty Affairs is when they type theirs up, they use the outline format, so it has numbers and alphabetic letters, and that I think is just confusing to people. So we prefer that you not have all the numbers and all the alphabet letters in there, because it just keeps, you know, tabbing it over further and further and further and killing space. We would prefer that you just have things in nice columns and nice format with the mesh heading. So Tom Defer is like a willing example here. But the thing that we've done recently also is put everybody's picture in the top right-hand corner of their CV. This has actually helped the ad hoc committees because it puts a name and a face together and helps facilitate a more positive review of a person as opposed to just a piece of paper. So you get to pick the picture, but like we really don't want the glamour shots or the family photo or the me and my dog or anything kind of a little out there, just kind of the passport kind of photo. So this is basically the mesh headings that people are using, and this is just a screenshot from the first page, but you can see that it's basic stuff on the demographics. Do not put your Social Security number on there. Do not put any other personal identifying information that you don't want, that's not anybody's business, right? because CVs get sent out all over everywhere, and they get posted and they get disseminated, so you want them to be private. So here's another example of the next part of Tom's CV, where he lists the present positions, and you see the start date and that it goes to the present. If it ended, you'd have the ending date, and then things lined up and the titles and the brief description. So for the Clinician Educator portfolio, it really is not meant to duplicate anything in the CV. You know, pretty much the only thing that should be on both is your name and page numbers. So if you have it in the CV, only if you're going to describe it in much more detail in the CEP should it be here. So you're not putting publications in both places. You're not putting research descriptions in both places. And the Clinician Educator portfolio, because of what you guys do, really needs to be updated periodically. It's harder to go back in time and sort of say, what have I done for the past 3 years? So the sooner you set up some tracking mechanism on your calendar, on a spreadsheet with your assistants to track your talks, your clinical time, the easier it is for you to use. Now, some people, and this is not required, but some people put kind of a personal mission statement at the top, like what is your career goal, what is your focus, and then what their career goals and objectives are, which are, again, brief bullets, and then their strategic plan. And then some people really have developed personal theories of teaching and learning, which might be described in more detail. So not everyone has those. Sometimes that feels a little squishy for people, which is okay, and I understand that. But it does help you think about what you're really doing here and what you do really well and what you're focusing your time and effort on. And they should match, right? So that if you think you're doing stuff over here and everything on your CEP is over here, then we have to help you get aligned again. So here's an example from a recent Clinician Educator portfolio where the mesh heading is clinical contributions, and then here's the description. General ID, inpatient consultation service attending, and they've done it for 5 years. 2 to 12 weeks per year, 6 hours a day, daily supervision of ID fellows, residents, daily documentation of all findings, led daily educational sessions, average 450 new consults per year. I think this could be even more descriptive. So clarifying for people how many fellows, how many residents, how many students on your team, how much prep time you have, how much face-to-face, patient bedside time you have, because clinical time is really important and valued. And I think sometimes just saying I do 12 weeks a year doesn't really sell it enough in terms of the time and effort and what really happens. So describing the comorbidities of the patients, the complexities of the patient, the fact that you're on call 24/7, take calls all over everywhere. And then this is bone and joint ID, inpatient consult service, same sort of thing where they described how many consults per year. I think, clarifying how many patients per day, how many patients are on the service is actually really helpful, particularly to non-clinicians and to people from other services. So, and then you can see they did the same thing where they described their clinic activities and clinic time. And then here's another mesh heading, development of methods for improved quality and efficiency of care. So Mike was kind enough to volunteer his. But I think the goal is not to have really, really long paragraphs and tomes. It's to have bullet points, but clear enough description with specific details that help non-internal medicine doctors understand how important your work is. So here's kind of a big difference. So for a CV, we want, the WashU format. I like having your headshot up in the top. Half-inch margins are perfectly fine. We don't want to kill trees. 12-point font. Black type. I've gotten some in all sorts of interesting colors. I've gotten some really artistic fonts. Don't go there. providing dates when it was last updated, no personal information, and if the section doesn't apply, for a mesh heading, either just leave the mesh heading and put not applicable, or take that mesh heading out. Then for the CEP, here's where the formats are. Again, don't put in numbers or different alphabet for the outline part of it. Don't repeat anything, and put things in general, both on the CV and your CEP, in chronologic order, from oldest to most recent. People are used to looking at things in terms of your education, starting with college, med school, residency, fellowship, current positions. So don't mix them up for your abstracts, for your papers, for your training, your committees, oldest to newest, and that way it's easy to keep adding to. So for the clinical educator portfolio, it's really all the stuff you do clinically, everything you do for education, and your community service. And I think you all do a lot in that realm as well. So for inpatient and outpatient for clinical activities, again, we want the time, we want the kind of service, description of the patients, description of the team that you're working with, and you got to describe it in a way, really, that a cell biologist or a plastic hand surgeon is going to understand, why it's really important and how hard it is. So somebody did a program on improving quality and efficiency of clinical care. So if you built a program like that or developed a new intervention to improve patient outcomes, describe it. Describe what you did, who you worked with, what the setting was, any measurements or metrics you have for showing the change that resulted from your activity. Committee work. Just putting that you're on, the antibiotic utilization review committee from 2007 to 2015 doesn't do anything for me. So I need to know how often the committee meets, what the role and responsibility of the committee is, what your role as a committee member was, and then when you're on committees, I ultimately want you to step up and have leadership roles, right? Because ultimately, that's what's going to be important to show your contributions. Same thing, descriptions for clinical trials or grants, the budget period, the time, your role, and on the clinician educator portfolio and the CV, these are all relevant. And generally, people put their current research and then past funded research after the funding ends. And then administrative responsibilities are also really important, so don't undervalue or undersell these either. It takes a lot of work to be a course master, to be a fellowship director, to run a program. So describe that for people. Describe the time, the people you interact with, the roles, the responsibilities. Again, the challenge here is doing it in a clear, concise, condensed way, but a specific way that people really understand. Now, for original contributions to the medical literature, if you have abstracts or papers, put those in your CV. Don't put them in your CEP again. But things that don't fit in your CV, either non-traditional formats, media-related events, that actually is a good fit for the clinician educator portfolio. And I think the other thing, bold your name, make it easy for people, count your publications, don't put bullet points so people can quickly say they had 32 publications and 15 of them were first or last authored. If you change your name because of whatever reason, bold and highlight and clarify at the top what the name change was, because I've seen people kind of get really undervalued because somebody didn't put two and two together that they had changed their name when they got married, and so, or they got unmarried or whatever. So make sure it's clear that people know who you are in that. And then feedback. This is the area where I think we're having the most trouble still. The goal here is not to print out every evaluation you've ever had and attach it to the clinician educator portfolio. And the goal is also not to only highlight all your excellent feedback and then hide the negative feedback. So people who write your letters of recommendations will look through your evaluations and will speak to that. But what you have to do here is figure out how to objectively document your patient satisfaction scores, any clinical service awards, or your teaching evaluations in a way that's objective and also condensed and abbreviated. Does that make sense? So didactic teaching sessions, this is really important. So you need to document where you gave the talk, what the title of the talk was, who the audience was, and sort of the prep time. And this is, pretty straightforward for lectures, but you need to be able to document the time that you spend in problem-based learning, in small group learning, or development of a curriculum, because those are all really important things that often people don't describe in sufficient detail to get credit for. Particularly new courses or lectures, that's a huge amount of work. Or if you took over for a course and revitalized it, that's really important to document. So here's an example for this particular course master who did Intro to Newborn Medicine. They described the purpose of the course, the hours, and what people learned from it. If you have enduring materials, you can refer to those on a website. Sometimes you can attach some of them, but people really don't want like books and magazines and 800 pages attached. So I think you've got to figure out how to describe and link people to where they can find these things electronically so as not to kill a million trees. Here's what you do for curriculum development, new methods of education. There's lots of things that you guys do that really could be on here and don't fit well on a CV. So mentoring is also incredibly important, and often people don't keep track well enough of who they mentor, how they mentor, and so this is actually something that's highly regarded at not only our department but multiple departments. So keeping track through your trainee table, but also in your CV or CEP, depending on the relevance of who you're mentoring and how, really needs to be in there. And just having a list of 800 students doesn't always do anything for people. So you need to explain how you mentored them, what the interaction was for what. So sometimes people will have students shadowing them. So if you have a student that comes and shadows you in clinic for an hour or 2 hours and you have hundreds of them, that's not exactly the same as mentoring somebody for a summer, where you have more extensive one-on-one interaction. So I think, you have to be able to describe what you did and how in a way that doesn't sort of over-embellish or over-focus on the wrong things. So CME, also highly valued, can take a lot of time, is important to the institution, is important to the community. So describing your role, responsibilities, what courses, and again, from oldest to newest. And then honors and awards. This is really important, and I'm still shocked by how often people don't keep track of their honors and awards. So it never gets old to us. It never gets old to committees who are reviewing you. And so keeping track of your teaching honors, your scholarship, your mentoring honors is really very important. And for some of these things, people outside of medicine or non-clinical departments may not know what a Loeb Scholar is. So some of these, or the Goldstein Leadership Awards. So for some of these, it's really helpful to put a 1 or 2 line description of what the honor and award is for. Now, if you've gotten a Distinguished Service Teaching Award for 20 years in a row, you don't have to describe it for all 20 years. You can describe it once somewhere. But I think for many of these, it's really important to understand what the award is for. So if you've put things in the lay literature, that also is relevant to your CEP. And then committees. We talked a little bit about this, but I think insofar as you can, it is beneficial to pursue leadership opportunities, which means working on committees, not just sitting there and sleeping through the committee, even though I may feel like doing that sometimes. But if you're not going to speak up and you're not going to contribute, then it's not worth your time to be there. So I think you have to really make yourself useful to committees. You have to integrate yourself into the leadership of committees, and then eventually get off and create spots for new people to roll on. And then local, regional, and national recognition is also very important. So I think you have to think about how you network and how you interact with organizations, with societies, at national meetings, to expand your sphere of influence so that when we go to ask for outside letters, there are people who know you. So having some outside mentoring or outside people on your career advisory committee is very useful, but also interacting with people on national committees is a way to really facilitate your career development. And media activities, as long as you can do it well, all you have to do is go on the news once and say something really horrible that you'll regret forever. But there is media training here, and so if you're brave and you want to do PR and interact with the community and with media, then take advantage of the media training through PR here and through the Clinical Research Training Center, and then keep track of your radio spots, what you do for the newspaper, and what you do on TV, because that's actually very important for our department, for you, and for the institution. So again, what's on your CV would probably just say that you are the clerkship director in internal medicine from 2001 to the present. What's going to be on your CEP is describing your role and responsibility in that clerkship directors in internal medicine national organization. What committees you were on, what leadership roles you had, what meetings you went to, in much greater detail. And then it's okay to have an other category, because we tried to make this comprehensive, but sometimes you're doing stuff, that really is extraordinary and is aligned with your career and great for you and for the community. And so if it doesn't fit anywhere else, put it in this other category and describe what it's for. So the things that you guys should read and should feel comfortable with, if you have not seen it before, is the APGAR document. So you should read through that and understand, because that is the basic policy for appointments and promotions here. And it applies to every department, all faculty. And then the WashU formatting for CVs and the Clinician Educator portfolio. And I think Jen Mosier, Mario, and Angela have done an extraordinary job putting things on the website with tools and examples for you to use. So I would be happy to take questions quickly before you break into small groups about this as background material, or any questions you have about the promotions process or career development in the Department of Medicine or at the institution. Michael?
So I have a question. I'm kind of in a transition point between fellowship and junior faculty, so there's a number of contributions that I had at a prior institution. Are those relevant to
Yes,
CE?
yes,
Or
yes.
is it mostly WashU's?
No, don't cut off your life prematurely. So the things, particularly some of you are younger than others, but I think particularly for junior faculty, if you have extraordinary honors and awards from college and from medical school and your house staff and fellowship, those should all be on there. And your research and your papers and what you did in your house staff and fellowship and medical school should all be on there. So this is a cumulative thing. And I think you only start cutting off the really old stuff when you get really old. So like, I'm probably the only one who can cut off, stuff from, people don't really care what I did in college, right? They may not even really care what I did in medical school anymore. But I think for the vast majority of you guys, you should be really building this longitudinal description of your activities. So that all should be on there. Morali?
So outside of Mario, I'm probably the oldest one in the room here.
Really?
And I'm getting the link
I'm the oldest.
The audience here. And just, I guess, if we've already gone through one promotion and we're building this for our next, how far
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So it is hard to go back for like your whole life. And I think for senior distinguished clinicians such as yourself, you know, senior. I think of you as senior. You said you were old.
Mario was old.
Yeah. Oh, Mario's old. Okay. So I think depending on what level you are at, the most important thing is to start with trying to recreate and rebuild it for the past year. So at the very least, you know, that's essential. I think if you can go back 3 or 5 years, then that's terrific. That helps me phenomenally. You know, when people get promoted, it's sort of a little bit like, what did you do for me lately? Because when you're getting promoted to assistant professor, we're looking at, you know, everything that was before because you're relatively young. Once you get promoted to associate professor, people look from mostly what happened since you were an assistant professor. And then when you get promoted to professor, they're really looking at what have you done since you were promoted to associate professor. And so it's really about your relevant recent contributions and what you have done since you were promoted the last time. And so for promotion to professor, people are looking for ongoing, continued success, contributions, international reputation, and not, you know, they're looking for a continued trajectory and not sort of a flat line or a downward slope kind of thing in terms of productivity. Other questions? Okay.
Great.
Mario and
Thank you.
Angela?
Thank you.